Recording, please. Oh, here we go. Welcome everyone to the Pearson Business Book Club. My name is Eloise Cook and I'm the publisher for the professional business list at Pearson. Each month at the book club, we choose a Pearson business or personal development book and invite the author on to discuss it. They'll also give a webinar on a key concept from the book. And if you need to leave halfway through, the video will be available to watch on demand at the book club website. So what is our book this month? It is The Mindfulness Habit by Lisa Wren. And if you haven't got a copy yet, you can buy it through the Pearson bookshop. So I will pop the link into the chat. Go. And at the time of recording, it is 99p on Kindle in the UK. So grab yourself a bargain. Great. Let me stop sharing. So, Lisa, welcome. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thanks, Eloise. Lovely to be here.
Excellent. I will just introduce you. So, Lisa Wren is a director at Pearson, a workplace psychology professional, and a well-being educator, speaker, and mentor. She is a professionally trained mindfulness teacher, delivering courses, leading groups, and supporting new mindfulness teachers, including NHS staff. Here's a fun fact. You love trying out new hobbies and you always have a variety of interests on the go at any time, from growing veg to tap dancing, writing plays to learning Greek. Crikey. It's not that you get bored easily, you just seem to have a lot of curiosity. Well, I think that's fantastic. I think curiosity is a skill we all need to have. Welcome. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. Yeah, this is really lovely to be here. And yes, I just want to qualify those. It doesn't mean that I'm good at all those hobbies. I just do them, try my best, especially the Greek. That's an ongoing struggle, but a joy at the same time.
It's the trying, isn't it?
It is. It definitely is. Yes.
Excellent. So let's start with our usual questions. So we ask these of all our authors. Tell me, why did you want to write this book?
Okay, so there are lots of reasons why I wanted to write this, but the first thing I do need to say is that this was suggested by the lovely Tracy Cassidy. I don't know if she's on the call, but it was her idea to write this book, and Eloise, obviously, you've been hugely supportive as well. But I honestly, the reasons that I wanted to write it became clear very quickly as soon as the idea was planted. And there are many reasons. So I wanted there to be a book that was written by someone who actually practices mindfulness. Now, I've read a lot of mindfulness titles, and I would say approximately half of them are written by someone who actually has their own personal practice and who understands what it is to be mindful. And then I also wanted there to be a book by someone who has a proper accredited teaching qualification and who has a bit of a science background. And really bringing all of those things together, I think that's really why I wanted to write the book, to offer something that was really robust and evidenced, that was a course, but also that told a bit of a story, and that was written by somebody who is not, I'm not a therapist, I'm not a high-end kind of academic, but I am someone who's right there in the workplace, in the messiness and the stress and the chaos, and the general kind of overwhelm of the world of work. And I wanted to write something that was from a place of equality with the reader. So I'm not in a superior position. I've been through it and continue to go through it. Work is stressful. So all of those reasons kind of came together to inspire me to write. And I guess on a more practical note, I just enjoy the challenge of bringing ideas together. And I wanted the opportunity to be able to do that. To draw on different influences for the book, so it's multi-dimensional. And also I wanted the opportunity to formulate my ideas and communicate them to a wider audience, helping people to achieve those kind of aha moments. Yes, this is me, I can see myself here. So yeah, a book for people who maybe don't think they need mindfulness, who think they can't be mindful, or who've tried it and have struggled to continue with the practice. So loads and loads of reasons why I wanted to write it.
Yes, I know we spoke about so much of that when we were talking about the idea, and even when you were writing it, I know that you kept putting so much thought into, how to make this a habit, and learning from the many practices that you were doing and holding with people, that you were sort of trying to make sure it was all the best, most useful content going into the book. So
Exactly. Yeah.
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 Great, great. So, next question. What surprised you about writing this book?
There were loads of surprises for me. When you are mindful, you look for novelty. That's something I'm going to be talking a bit about later on. And it's actually quite a skill to find novelty in the everyday. It's not so difficult to find novelty in something that's brand new, like writing a book that you've never done before. Um, I was surprised by a lot of things, therefore. I was surprised mainly by how personal it felt. I mean, this is a business book, it's a professional title. Um, but it is also about my personal story. And that's really important to me that I conveyed that. But it was surprising how personal it felt. So I've written a lot of content over previous years, both academically. I've written lots of course content, I've delivered lots of content to people, but this really did feel like a personal kind of expression as much as a professional and helpful book. It was like I was having a conversation with the reader as I was writing the book, and that felt surprising and quite joyful, I have to say. Um, and I was able to draw on a lot of my own experiences, and my own experience of burnout and of stress and of overwhelm and anxiety. And it was surprising how much that was able to kind of flow in a peaceful way onto the page. And it felt very reassuring that I was able to kind of communicate my ideas. Um, and yeah, I guess the other surprising thing was that process was very energy begetting. So you'd think it would be quite a draining experience, both all the research and the information that needed to be gathered, and the peer review process, all of that good stuff that went into it. You'd think it would be kind of draining and exhausting, and actually it provided me with more energy and more inspiration. So that was really surprising. I expected it to be much more of a I guess a difficult and challenging write, but actually it did flow. And actually that's interesting about it being energy begetting, because that is what mindfulness is, as an approach. It does bring energy. It doesn't sap your energy. People think, oh, I've got to practice my mindfulness. 9 times out of 10, once they have, they feel refreshed and energized. And that was really mirrored in the process of writing the book. But it was surprising that that was the experience. So yeah.
Good. And yeah, I think sharing a little with the reader is such a good thing, because you want to create a bond. And I think particularly this subject area, it is sort of personal, and you sort of feel a bit vulnerable, perhaps, if you're sort of sitting there trying to be mindful. So I think that's good. And,
Yeah.
I think it makes it a better experience.
No, definitely, and that's a really good word to use, actually, but the vulnerability. And I don't have any issue in sharing my story, and I actually think it's really important in this subject matter, as you say, to be open about experiences and open about personal difficulties with stress and anxiety, and the whole range of things that we might struggle with in the workplace and outside of it as well. But and I guess being willing to be vulnerable to a wide audience, I think, is really important. I think if more people did that, we would be able to embrace a sense of common humanity much more effectively. So that was important to me. So yeah.
Oh, yeah, very, very wise words. Last question. How do you want readers to feel after reading the book?
Okay, so and obviously this embodies all of the reasons that I wanted to write it as well. And how we feel, someone said, and I'm misquoting probably, how we feel is our most important reality, or it's our most significant reality, how we feel. So how the reader feels was incredibly important to me. So a few things. I wanted them, and I would love them to feel surprised at how doable mindfulness is, how accessible it is, how simple it is. Not always easy, but simple. And I would really like people to feel empowered as a result of practicing what I teach in the book. Um, Mindfulness as an approach means moving from reactivity, reaction to intentional response, from living really kind of automatically and impulsively to being more intentional and to noticing actively. And this inevitably, to actually to quite a large degree, promotes our ability to make choices, to choose rather than just to go along and do what we always do in the way we always have done it. So I'd love the readers to feel that they are reminded that they do have a choice. They actually have a choice about, or you have a choice about what you think and how you think and what you do, and therefore how you feel as a result. So that sense of empowerment, I think, is really important to me. I would also like the reader to feel comforted. As I mentioned before, this wasn't written from a position of superiority. I don't have any kind of special gifts, really. I've just learned what I've learned through experience. And I would love for you, if you read the book, to feel comforted that we share a common humanity. I think I'm going to paraphrase incorrectly, but something that stayed with me from a Stephen Fry book, and I can't remember which one it was. He said something like, if I am not alone in what I feel, then neither are you. And there is something about recognizing your own experience in someone else's story. It's not going to solve everything. Of course it isn't. But it does remind us that we do share these common challenges. And that in turn can lead to compassion and feelings of compassion for yourself, which is sometimes difficult, but also for others. And compassion, as has been evidenced actually in psychological research, is a very powerful force for good mental health. So empowerment, choice, and common humanity and compassion, as well as curiosity about what there is to learn in this subject, are all of the things that I would love my readers to feel when they engage with the book.
Fantastic. Wow, I'm very excited for your session. So it's dispelling the myths about mindfulness and why what you think is wrong. So I'll let you take it away, Lisa.
Thank you so much, Eloise. Thank you. Okay, everybody, I'm going to share my screen, and let me do that first. And I am actually going to start, however, or just let me know if that is displaying okay. Can you, Eloise, can you see that?
Yes, that's great.
Oh, brilliant. Excellent. Okay. I'm actually going to start with a short mindfulness practice, because I think, well, it'd be rude not to, wouldn't it? This is a session about mindfulness. So this is an optional practice. You can just sit and listen, or you can engage with it. It's not going to last very long, just a few minutes to demonstrate how accessible mindfulness is. But speaking personally, giving a presentation like this is quite stressful. Just because you practice mindfulness and teach it doesn't mean that you're immune to a few performance anxiety nerves. So this is also for me, and it's for you as well. So however you are feeling right now, maybe just do a little temperature check, see how you are, whether you are, what you're bringing with you to this session. Maybe there's a lot of distractions. Maybe there's lots going on, other things that are calling for your attention. At the beginning of every mindfulness practice, I encourage people to make good choices for themselves. So are there screens you can minimize? Do you want to turn your phone over for the next few minutes, or the next 45 minutes if you're feeling very brave? So going into this, transitioning into this short mindfulness practice with some awareness of how we're feeling, and of maybe being aware of any distractions, and being willing to put those on hold for a few moments. So I'm going to invite you, first of all, and this is how we start most mindfulness practices, is to identify what we call an anchor for our attention. So you can choose sensations in the hands, so any tingling or heat in the palms of your hands, the feelings of your feet on the floor, so maybe that pressure and contact, or the sensations of the breath in the body. And you may have noticed that I've given you those options, your attention going to those places: hands, feet, breath. Notice how our attention can move. And you can just select and anchor the sensations that you can feel in any one of those places, or something else. It might be something external, like sounds around you, maybe the humming of your computer, or sounds from outside. And it's like hooking our attention onto this anchor. We're going to bring our focus to those sensations. And in just a few seconds of silence, just allowing your attention intentionally to rest on what you can feel. And in those very few seconds, you may have noticed that your attention has wandered away, that thinking has arrived, that you're wondering about what's going to be next, or what's next in your day, or thinking about what you're going to have for your tea tonight, or all kinds of thoughts, plans, daydreams can arrive. And we can also notice that we can bring our attention back to where we intended it to be. So just checking in again now with your anchor, tuning in to those sensations. So noticing this ability, thoughts come in, your attention wanders, you can bring it back. And we'll finish the practice with just a little bit of letting go, of mindful letting go. So I'm going to invite you to move your attention into the body, into your face. So allowing your brow to soften, maybe your jaw to loosen. A face that works so hard during the day, communicating, expressing, just allowing the face to relax. Allowing the shoulders to fall away. Noticing maybe the weight of the arms. Just allowing any tension to release if it will. And if it won't, we can just notice that, yeah, I've got some tension there. Moving down to the belly, softening the belly, maybe feeling the breath down there. Allowing the legs to be heavy, the chair to take your weight. No sense of forcing. You don't need to try and make things happen. You can just allow them to be. And maybe finishing on a breath, a slightly deeper breath in, and then on the out breath, just letting go, sense of weight traveling down through the body. Okay. And that was a short mindfulness practice. And before we move on, it will be great to maybe hear in the chat how you found that practice, and you can just put maybe a single word in the chat. Any observations? Maybe there was a lot of mind wandering. Maybe you felt distracted. Maybe you felt bored. Maybe you felt relaxed. So Monica, refreshed. Yeah, it can be refreshing. Excellent. And if you don't want to put anything in the chat, then just allowing your eyes just to scan down the responses that there are. Lots of different responses. Energizing, great, soothed, relaxing. And these are the responses that are completely normal. Whatever you experienced was your experience. There's no right or wrong. Sandra able to come back from a wandering mind, which is the key to mindfulness. Not that the mind wanders, but that we're able to come back. Relaxing, grounded. Yeah, realizing how tense my face was. It's amazing, isn't it? You don't, yeah, we sit there, we sit with a frown. Mindfulness is great for not getting lines in your face because you just notice, yeah, scrunching my eyes up, I'm tensing my jaw, and an opportunity to let it go. Fantastic. So, well, I certainly feel a bit better. So it worked for me. Hopefully it was okay for you too. So let's move on to our subject. And this is what we're going to be talking about today, the myths about mindfulness. And there are two things that we're going to do today. So we are going to be looking at myths, the myths of mindfulness, because it is important to understand, or to have I wouldn't say a correct view, but maybe keeping an open mind about what mindfulness is and how it's defined. So there are two purposes to doing this. First of all, yes, we can reorient our understanding of mindfulness and understand maybe what it can mean for us personally. So we'll be talking through that. And then secondly, in the latter part of the presentation, I'm going to talk about mindfulness as an approach that can help us to gain insight, and it can help us to understand things in a fresh way. So moving away from assumptions. So these two themes are kind of linked, aren't they? So yeah, we're gonna do some myth busting, but how have we ended up with those myths in the first place? You know, how do we generally, not only in the field of mindfulness and our assumptions about mindfulness, but how do we end up thinking what we think about the things that we assume we know for certain? So we're going to be talking a little bit about that as well. But first of all, before we go on to myths, I'm going to very, very quickly talk about what mindfulness is before we move to what it isn't. So these are my definitions, and in the book I outline various definitions from academics and from practitioners and from therapists and from thought leaders within the world of positive psychology and mindfulness. But the words and statements I'm going to share with you now are how I like to frame mindfulness, and they may not be what you're expecting or what you particularly associate with mindfulness. So the first one's a pretty obvious one for anyone that knows anything about mindfulness. It's about active noticing, or as I call it in the book, active awareness. This is what it's about. Being actively aware to what we're thinking, what we're feeling, and physical sensations. And we did all of those things in the practice that we just did. We noticed when thoughts came in. We may have even noticed what those thoughts were. We noticed what feelings were around. That's what I encouraged you to do at the start, taking that little temperature check. So before we'd even moved into that formal practice, we were already kind of checking in with ourselves. That's mindfulness as well. And then we can focus on physical sensations. And all of this active noticing is really important for our mental health. And I describe that, the reasons why, in the book. I go into quite a lot of detail about that. Mindfulness is also about seeking novelty. And I'm going to be quoting quite a lot of Dr. Ellen Langer in this presentation. She's an amazing thought leader in the field of mindfulness, very experienced Harvard professor. She's an amazing person in this field. I would definitely recommend her writing and her books. And she describes mindfulness as seeking novelty, experiencing things afresh. And just as I was saying in Eloise's questions earlier, that is energy begetting. It is refreshing. Some of you use that word, refreshing. It isn't difficult in that respect. It is actually energizing. What's difficult actually is maintaining what we think is right and maintaining our assumptions, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. So mindfulness is about seeking novelty. It is the spirit of disruption, and I love this. It's so important to disrupt what we do as often as we can, to disrupt ourselves from our routine, to feel alive, to feel awake, to just notice. And in the book, in most chapters, there's an idea of how we can do this in daily life, and how it really helps us to kind of wake up and just see things maybe from a different angle. Mindfulness is about choice and intentionality, and I spoke a little bit about this in Eloise's questions earlier. It gives us choice, and intentionality is an incredibly important word for me when I'm describing mindfulness, because most of the time, although we think we are, most of the time we are not intentional. Most of the time we are doing what we always do, thinking in familiar patterns, well-worn neural pathways, to put it scientifically. Most of the time we are not intentional, but we just think we are, and that's the problem. We don't notice. Ellen Langer says we are mostly unaware of our unawareness. We are oblivious most of the time. She makes these bold statements, and she has the evidence to back it up. Mindfulness is also about discernment and compassion. And compassion is an awkward word for some of us. We don't really feel we can be compassionate to ourselves. No problem being compassionate towards others, but to ourselves, oh no, gives me the ick. No, I'll just get on with it. I don't deserve or need compassion. And discernment is really not, it's about making choices in a deliberate way and discerning rather than judging. So suspending a harsh judgment of ourselves, which can be unhelpful, and instead leaning into some compassion. And this is probably my favorite one. We are mindful when we're having fun. When we're having fun and we're in the moment, we are not worrying over the past or predicting the future. We are right there. As Fatboy Slim says, right here, right now. That is how we are when we're having fun. And that is what mindfulness is all about. So some different ways of describing mindfulness from maybe what you're expecting. And there was a word that was notably absent from my definitions that I've just given you. I'll give a gold star to anyone who can notice the obvious word that you may have noticed that was absent. I'll give you a clue. It begins with M. Yes, Michael, Cassandra, Michael, both double stars. Fantastic. So here we go. The first myth. And this picture is someone having an allergic reaction to the word meditation, which used to happen to me all the time. Like, oh, especially in the workplace. Oh my goodness, we can't be doing that, can we? So mindfulness isn't meditation. In fact, we get it the wrong way round. We can use meditation as one of the many ways that we can be mindful. But mindfulness isn't meditation. And there are two problems here. Not only is it a myth that you need to meditate to be mindful, but the definition of meditation is also hugely variable and open to misconception. So the practice that we did earlier, you can define that as a meditation. I would call it a practice. But meditation is actually a form of, in this context, is a form of attention training, which is based on the scientific psychology concept of metacognition. It's noticing what's happening in our own minds. And we did this during the practice that we just did. So meditation as a concept in mindfulness is almost like going to the gym. It's what the gym does to the physical body, mindfulness does for the brain. So it's that, as Sandra said in the chat, noticing the mind wandering and coming back. And it's the repetition of that which does some really good stuff in the brain, which I talk about in the book, strengthening the pathways to calm, for example, to rationality, bringing your thinking and human executive function back online. So we don't need to meditate to be mindful. We don't have to. It is quite a concentrated and focused way to be mindful, but we don't have to. And also we just need to be careful with how we define it. It isn't, mindfulness is not a spiritual, for example, a spiritual practice. It's very much a scientific one. And it taps into the process of neuroplasticity, which basically means learning in the brain. So it contributes to that. But it absolutely, mindfulness is not meditation. So that's our first myth. So we don't need to be having an allergic reaction to that word at all. Mindfulness will fix me. And again, this is another myth. Of course, it assumes that you need fixing. Why would you need fixing? Everybody worries. Everybody feels anxious. Everybody feels overwhelmed from time to time. Everybody feels stressed. So you don't really need fixing. And mindfulness is not a fixer of everything. It's not a panacea. Often we are told that we need to be happy for all, or at least most of the time, that anxiety is bad, that stress is bad, overwhelm is bad. There's something wrong with me. I need fixing. It's not how I want to feel. But you're not broken. You're just having a normal human response to whatever it is around and about for you. And mindfulness is not going to stop those ups and downs of life. It won't prevent things from happening, but it does help us to notice and respond to how we feel in different and more useful ways, which is probably why people assume that mindfulness is a fixer. When we're mindful, we may notice that we're anxious or stressed more readily. So we might notice it, and then that gives us the opportunity to really respond to it rather than ignoring it or avoiding it. Or it can help us to stop relying on less healthy coping mechanisms that you might lean on automatically. So remember, we're responding, not reacting. But it's not a fixer of everything. It's not a panacea. And we have to think carefully about whether we need fixing at all. Are we actually broken, or are we just experiencing what it is to be human? So this is a great one. Mindfulness is relaxation for relaxed people. So people often say to me, I'm way too stressed to be mindful. I'm too much of a stressy person. That's why I can't do mindfulness. Like relaxation is some kind of prerequisite for being mindful. Or my students sometimes, when I'm teaching mindfulness, my students sometimes may put off their mindfulness practice, whatever it is, whether it's routine, whether routine mindfulness, active awareness, whether it's a bit of meditation, they'll put it off because they weren't feeling calm enough to do it. I felt way too agitated at the beginning of the week, so I didn't do it. But later on, I felt a bit calmer, so then I practiced it. And they say this with no sense of irony. But it is an easy assumption to make. We have images of mindful people in the media looking relaxed. They're sitting, meditating at their desks, all nice and calm. Or they're watching a sunset, sitting cross-legged, the finger and thumb together. Oh, that's what it's like to be mindful. But that isn't what it's like to be mindful. We can be mindful when we're angry, when we're in irrational states of mind, when we're argumentative, when we're stressed, when we're really scared. We can be mindful anytime, whatever mood, feelings, thoughts are around. So the answer to this myth, really, I would say, is that we bring mindfulness to the moment, whatever that moment holds. And it might be quite useful to be mindful when we're angry, to notice how that feels and just tune into that. Maybe feel it in the body, let it go, or work with it, making that decision. It's also important to bust this myth, because we don't need to strive for relaxation either. We don't need to use mindfulness as a way to force relaxation on ourselves. I think I say in the book, anyone who's ever tried to force themselves to go to sleep because they've got insomnia will know that it is completely futile to try and force ourselves to feel or to be a certain way. So trying to force ourselves to be calm and relaxed is not going to work. Now, of course, we can set a sense of direction to feeling more relaxed if that's what we feel we need. And just like we did in the practice earlier, just that letting go in the body of tension can help. But what if you don't want to feel relaxed? What if, like today, you need a bit of performance anxiety, you need a bit of stress, you need a bit of energy? Does that mean you can't be mindful in those situations? No, of course it doesn't. So the overarching message for this one is that we bring mindfulness to the moment, whatever that moment holds for us. This is another fantastic myth to be able to bust. I don't know if Ashley's on the call, but Ashley Lodge and I taught mindfulness at Pearson for many years together, and he promoted and created the mindfulness program, and he had to present to, I think it was the board at Pearson, and he always said if he went into the board at Pearson and said, oh, I'm going to help everyone to empty their minds, probably wouldn't have gone down too well. So mindfulness is not about clearing your mind of thoughts. That is another futile thing. It just doesn't, it's not, the mind is designed to think. And actually, if we go back to our gym analogy, where mindfulness is like exercise for the brain, if we didn't have thinking, if thoughts didn't arrive during a mindfulness practice, whether it's a meditation practice, whether it's a routine activity that you're doing mindfully, whether it's an active awareness exercise that you're doing, if thoughts didn't arrive, then we would have nothing to work with. So at the gym, it would be like lifting empty weights. There'd be no resistance at all. So we need our attention to be hijacked and moved away from where we intended it to be, in order for us to notice. That trains us in awareness, and in order for us to then bring it back to where we intended it to be, which is the attention training part of mindfulness. And if we practice this enough, our awareness will develop, so we'll start noticing more with all of those wonderful benefits. And if we improve our attentional control, it means that we can notice when we're maybe following thoughts that are less than helpful, that are kind of maybe signaling a deterioration in our mood, maybe lots of worry. Here I go again. I notice I'm worrying. I always do this. This is me worrying. Okay, I'll leave that thought there. I don't have to follow it. I don't have to expand and elaborate on it. So this is very different. These cognitive techniques are very different from clearing your mind of thoughts. So there's no emptying of minds needed when we practice mindfulness. And we can welcome thoughts in. We can welcome them as the distraction that helps us to notice and return our attention. So here's some quick fire myths that we can bust. You need plenty of time for mindfulness. Well, you can be mindful, as I've said, in any moment. So we don't technically need to find a lot of time. It can be helpful to designate time, and many people do find that helpful, to kind of carve out a time where they do either sit in practice, or they do some mindful movement, or they find a routine activity to which they will apply mindfulness. So, but you won't need loads of time. And actually in the book, what we do, as Eloise mentioned earlier, is developing that habit means starting really small. So starting with, you know, there's a practice that I run for 1 minute. Who can't find 1 minute? When we teach mindfulness, we often say, if you don't have time for mindfulness, then you really, really need to find time for mindfulness. Because in many ways, it opens up time, because it increases our awareness about what we are doing, where our attention is. Is this where I intended to be? We don't need to be still. So that puts a lot of people off. I sit for hours being still. We don't need to be doing that. It's not necessary. And silence, well, that would be wonderful, wouldn't it? Who wouldn't want a bit more silence in their lives? Well, it's not practical. And when we do our mindfulness of sounds practices, we bring in sounds around us as a focus for our attention, as an anchor. The more we desire silence and don't get it, the more frustrated we get. So actually embracing what we can hear around us, if you have the gift of hearing, if you do have that sense available to you, then it can be something to be grateful for. And we can notice and we can bring sounds in. I quite often do a mindfulness practice when I'm on the underground, on the tube, and just taking in all the noises. And when my attention wanders, or I start having a bit of commentary about what I can hear, I just come back to the raw qualities of those sounds. And that's a mindfulness practice. Mindfulness is escapism. It's very tempting to see mindfulness as an escape from reality, as to, I just don't want to think anymore, I don't want to feel anymore. Well, mindfulness isn't about escaping. It's about actually the opposite. It's about approaching life. And there's some fantastic psychological, scientific evidence around the benefits of actually approaching what we find difficult, as well as what we find really pleasant. So it's not about turning away. It's not about pushing away. It's not about avoidance. It's not going to help you escape from life. Quite the opposite. It's a re-engagement, but in a new, novel way, with context. So it's definitely not escapism. And I talk quite a bit about that in the book. And mindfulness is not a special mental state. So it's not for the privileged few. It's not esoteric. It's something that only some people can do. Mindfulness is a state of mind that we all have. It's an ability that we all have. It's just becoming present. It's becoming present and actively noticing. So there's nothing special about it. Now, it can feel special if you're not used to it. If you do get those moments where, oh yes, of insight and clarity or calm or whatever it is, you can appreciate that. That can feel special, but it isn't a special mental state. So now we've gone through some myths. I will just remind you of what mindfulness is, so you can just be reminded of these key definitions, because these are important. And I think that the myths arise for a reason, and I think that it's great to be able to reorient you to maybe a different view and drop some of the misconceptions and assumptions. And just for the next few minutes before we move to questions, I would just like to just move to this last part of the presentation. If you remember, there were two parts to this presentation. And so we've explored some myths and some assumptions, and hopefully this has helped to fill in some gaps or broaden your understanding. But I did want to finish with a foundational principle of mindfulness. And that is that we always assume as humans that we know. We know what we know for sure. We both strive for certainty, and we get certainty when we think that we know something. And once we think we know something, we pay less or even no attention to it. And this is how our myths and our misconceptions and our assumptions persist. So we all carry knowledge and assumptions. We carry views and judgments around with us, and they might be right or they might be wrong. But the biggest challenge is that we don't always notice that we have them. And yet, our assumptions about all kinds of things dictate our actions. So, for example, in the example of mindfulness, mindfulness is meditation. Okay, so say that's your assumption. And I don't do meditation. I don't believe in it. It's not for me. I don't believe I can do it. Therefore, mindfulness is not for me. End of story. So that's just a very simple example in the current, with the current subject matter that we can use to see that once we learn something once, we tend to repeat that knowledge, or just we never think to update it. And we'll all have examples of these things. So we do the things that we always do in the way we've always done them. We follow patterns of thinking. We tell ourselves the same stories on a loop. And Dr. Ellen Langer describes this as mindlessness, which sounds a little bit harsh, or harsh, or you're very mindless. But, you know, it's the word she chooses, and it's accurate. She describes mindlessness itself, where we don't really notice the current context. We just use our existing learning and our existing knowledge as fact in every situation. She describes this as a very inactive state of mind, where the past has a strong influence over the present. So what we've learned stays with us. We're kind of driven by an invisible and unconscious certainty of what we know. We draw on maybe one perspective. And in this state, we are unaware of any broader or immediate context. So what is present here and now? And I'm going to give you, this is the simplest and most inconsequential example that I could find. And in the chat, I would love to hear from you. I would love for you to tell me when 1 + 1, so when 1 is added to 1, it doesn't equal 2. Oh, and I'm seeing that we might have a frozen screen. Yeah, I think I've got a froze. Can you still hear me though?
I can hear you, Lisa.
Yeah, I think maybe it might have, yeah. Okay. I think my view is frozen as well for some reason. But anyway, as long as you can still hear me. Yeah, so tell me, when is 1 + 1 not 2? When does it not add up to 2? Can you think of any examples? And maybe you can't, and if you can't, that's absolutely fine. Oh, good, you can still see the deck. That's a good thing. Hopefully my face isn't frozen in too much of an embarrassing expression. That can happen. No, nobody. So can. Excellent. That's fantastic one, Sarah. I never even thought of that. Absolutely. That's a brilliant one. I'm going to keep that one. Fantastic. So there you go. 1 + 1. Yes, Dave, piles of laundry. That's on my list as well. So if you add one pile of laundry to another pile of laundry, you don't end up with 2 piles of laundry. You've still got one. Right. What about yeah, things like Ellen Langer uses the example of chewing gum. Yes, books, 2 piles become 1 pile. What about when you're making pizza dough? You start off 2 and think, no, actually, I want 1 big pizza. So you're adding 1 and 1 and it doesn't make 2. Now, we are taught that 1 and 1 equals 2. We're taught that in schools, and incontrovertible fact. It's undeniable in maths, 1 and 1 is 2. Actually, if you change the number system, and I don't know about this, but if you change the number system to a base 2 system, then 1 + 1 actually equals 10. But in everyday life, we can find examples when clouds are floating in the sky, 2 cloud masses, and they come together. They don't, that's not 2, that's one cloud. So it feels like everywhere we look, 1 and 1 actually doesn't make 2. Maybe even more often than not in everyday situations, this absolute truth is actually untrue. It's all to do with context. Context is everything. As Ellen Langer says, we are frequently in error, but rarely in doubt. Isn't that an amazing quote? So whilst it's interesting to consider the assumptions and myths about mindfulness, the wider point is actually more important, that mindfulness itself is a vehicle. It helps us to take a fresh look, to wake up to the information around and within us in this moment. And yeah, we can replace a myth maybe with a more correct piece of information. But in another context, that correct information may be incorrect or inappropriate or irrelevant, or maybe even disrespectful to someone else's view. Meditation isn't mindfulness. Well, actually, it is for me. I love to meditate, and that's the way I'm mindful. So we need this ability to frequently pause and notice context, to notice with discernment. So the more mindful we can be, the more mindful we will be. So I'm going to leave you with this thought. So know your own myths. It's really important to know your own myths. It's important to understand myths of mindfulness, but actually agency, choice, discernment, these are the products of mindfulness. And we all have our own myths. So try to notice when they show up. Myths like, I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough for that. Others are smarter than me. I know that I can't slow down. It's a fact that I have to be always on in my job, to answer immediately, to be everything to everybody. Only I can do this task or chore properly. Work is not supposed to be fun. There is work and then there is fun. I must be happy all of the time. The things that we feel and that we tell ourselves dictate our actions often. So when I was in school, and I'll just leave you with this example, when I was in school, it wasn't all that long ago, girls weren't really encouraged to do science. So for many, many years, I knew that I could never get a degree in science. So I didn't, until I started to practice mindfulness and started to question that. When I was suffering from the most appalling burnout, I knew that I would never feel mentally well ever again. This was my new normal. So for a long time, I didn't bother asking for help. So it is possible to create and maintain a world of formal conclusions. Quote, everything you think you know for sure, every limit you place on yourself is a function of your mindlessness. Important things can happen when we give up the view that we know. So that is the end of the presentation, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen and hopefully unfreeze my face, which may, I don't know what happened there, but
Thank you, Lisa. That was, I feel quite rested and calm. That was
oh,
fantastic.
good. I'm not sure my camera's working, is it? I don't
Yeah,
know.
I can't
Yeah.
see you at the moment, but oh,
Oh, there we
you're
are.
back.
I've just turned
You're
it off
back.
and on again. There we are.
That's the trick. Well, yes, if anyone has any questions for Lisa, please pop them in the Q&A. We had some in advance, so I will start with those, and hopefully they will sort of chime with what everyone's thinking. So first question, how do you deal with social situations at a time when your symptoms of anxiety are so distracting and so draining on your energy levels and your ability to express yourself? Gosh, sounds difficult.
Yes, so this is I think this is a question about social anxiety, which mindfulness can actually be really helpful for, and also for generally for communication with other people. So there was a lot of work by a guy called John Kabat-Zinn, who was one of the main people who brought mindfulness into kind of modern Western medicine, actually. But he's done a lot of work in mindfulness and stress reduction. And he talks a lot about our ability to communicate with each other in a mindful way. And it can be really, really upsetting and really impactful on our self-esteem if we're not able to communicate, if we do feel really stressed and anxious in social situations. And what mindfulness can do, I think, is first of all help us to slow down. So when I knew I was giving this big presentation today, I deliberately slow my speech down. I deliberately think, take my time to pause, to literally breathe, and just a simple act of doing that can be helpful. And communication in general is beneficial when you're practicing mindfulness. Communication helps. It is helped by mindfulness because you're definitely, and there is really good evidence for this, you definitely come across as more of an active listener and more engaging. Actually even more charismatic. There was a fantastic study that Ellen Langer did, actually. So it helps with kind of charisma in social situations as well. And it can help us to be calm, and it can help us to take a moment and to be more at peace with ourselves. So I think there are lots of elements of mindfulness that can help in those situations. And it is one that many of us struggle with, right? And I think that it is difficult, particularly post-pandemic, actually, where people were in lockdown and then out in the world. It's a real thing. It can be very challenging. So the self-compassion aspects of mindfulness can be really helpful as well in those situations.
Most people will experience a loss in their lifetime, and managing our grief while also trying to do our job can be a challenge and potentially change our ambitions and or prospects. How can mindfulness help us manage our grief?
Okay, so first thing to say is I'm not a grief counsellor, and I would always recommend to get professional support when you've suffered a loss. My own personal understanding and belief is that is going to be helpful. So there is evidence that mindfulness can be helpful with grief, but if you are suffering from grief, the most important thing to do is to get help first, and then to find out the best way to apply it. So my specialty is mindfulness, the application in the workplace for things like stress and overwhelm. So it's not my field of expertise, but I do know that there's good evidence that it can be supportive. Obviously, it helps us to understand our own feelings better and to be open to them, which is a great way for going on that journey through grief. But definitely ask for help, and specifically if you're interested in mindfulness, then do ask how mindfulness can help, and there'll be content out there and people out there that can support you in that.
And quick one, how do you spell the surname of the man called John who you referenced?
Oh, John Kabat-Zinn, Kabatzin. What I'll do is I'll put it in the chat in a second. But yeah, John Kabat-Zinn. If you just do a Google search on him, he'll pop right up because he's Mr. Mindfulness, so you'll see him.
Oh, here's a good one. Do you think hobbies play a part in helping us to be mindful?
This is a great question. So as we said in my fun fact, which I'm not sure how fun it was, but yes, I do have a lot of hobbies, and it can help. I think it can help to have hobbies because it can help put you in a state called flow, which I talk about in the book, which is kind of akin to mindfulness, but not really. But there is evidence that a mindfulness practice can enable us to move into a flow state more easily. And when we're doing our hobbies, we are more than likely in a flow state, because flow requires just enough challenge to make it interesting, but enough kind of expertise and interest and curiosity to keep us in that moment. So I think hobbies are a great way to become more mindful. We can pay attention to how we feel when we're doing our hobbies, and also we can notice what our hobbies mean for us. Often hobbies can turn into other things. They can impact our career choices, what we're interested in, what we find fun, and they can help on the social side as well. And I would just give a shout out for volunteering, which is not necessarily a hobby, but it is something that is a kind of extracurricular thing, which has been shown to be incredibly helpful for well-being and mental health is volunteering. So hobbies, volunteering, all of those things are great things to do mindfully and can support a mindfulness practice as well.
Fantastic. Can you explain a little bit about the book in terms of how it is set out and what people might find? We've got your website link coming up, but yeah, just about the structure of the book, Lisa.
Yeah, absolutely. So it is quite different. In fact, very different from other mindfulness titles, because it combines an 8-session mindfulness course. So that's the kind of core of it. So and that course is based on a combination of the evidenced curricula that we have in the mindfulness space. So it brings those curricula together and is presented. You don't have to do it week by week. That's the beauty of having the book, because if you go to a class, you're kind of constrained by that week by week cadence. There is no set cadence. You can take as long as you like, but it's 8 sessions of a mindfulness course. And then interleaved between those 8 lessons are topics and themes from the workplace. So things like we've spoken about communication in the workplace. That's a good example, and how mindfulness can benefit. There's a whole chapter on anxiety, because that's a #1 theme that always comes up. So yeah, it's an 8-session course, and then it's interleaved with these kind of practical sets of information relating to challenges in the workplace. So yeah, that's the kind of nature of the book. Oh, and of course you've got the audio as well, which all of the practices are there so that you can listen and practice. So yeah, they're proving quite popular.
Excellent, excellent. Um, here's something that I'm sure we can relate to. It's 3:11 a.m. and the dog's woken you up barking, and then your mind starts racing about what you need to do at work. What works to get back to sleep for a couple of hours? Do you have any tips?
Oh, so hands up who's never had this. I mean, it's so difficult. It's really a tough one. So there are a number of things that you can do. So here are some quick fire answers. The first thing is when we're caught up in thoughts, if we can externalize our attention, so listening outside of our own minds and bodies, listening outside and repeatedly doing that, so you'll find you'll get caught back up in thinking and planning. Normally it's planning, isn't it? And we're writing emails, like you're trying to go to sleep and there's an email kind of being drafted in your mind, or a conversation that you're going to have, you're rehearsing. You'll notice that happens and you come back to something external, whether it's a sound, a clock ticking, traffic outside, whatever it is, essential heating, whatever it is. The other thing to do is to do a body scan practice, and I know this helps with sleep because I have actually had people falling asleep whilst I have led a body scan. So it does tend to inspire sleep, which is literally what it says. You just move your attention through the body. Usually a bit of tension releases at the same time. Again, the mind wanders and you bring it back. Really, the way that mindfulness can work for sleep is that it trains you, and this is why practice is important rather than just as and when you need it. It trains you to notice when your mind has gone off where you didn't really intend it to be. So you notice faster, oh, I'm planning that. And then it allows you to come back to an anchor point, whether that's in the body or outside of the body. And if you keep repeating that, the repetitive nature of that can help you to get back to sleep. And the other practice, if you're very, very caught up, is one conscious breath. And you can get that practice for free on my website, one conscious breath. And that can really be enough just to trigger a little bit of mindfulness, and then you can kind of repeat that if you can. But it just is it helps to break down the resistance to maybe a longer practice. I'm just going to follow one breath, just one breath, and that can be helpful. But I hear you. It's a tough one. Waking up in the night like that, the mind doesn't feel like your best friend, does it?
Exactly. Last question, I think. What's your advice for how to practice when depression and low mood are key factors for people?
Okay, so it's a really good question. I'm not a therapist, but I am trained in my mindfulness-based cognitive therapy and mindfulness-based stress reduction, both of which have an application for this, particularly mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. So I would absolutely advise that you look into MBCT for this. The way that mindfulness helps is, again, it's the same principle. We can notice faster when our thoughts have taken a turn towards a depressive line of thinking. So usually if you imagine it as a funnel, a healthy kind of mindset, a nice broad set of thinking, very broad funnel. And then sometimes we get caught up in these habits of mind, which what we think, we end up feeling, right? So we feel our thoughts. So we can notice when thoughts are taking us on a bit of a journey, an uncomfortable set of thoughts and worry, whatever it might be. You might become familiar with the patterns of thinking that suggest or indicate or signpost a drop in low mood. We can notice we're having those thoughts, and then we can deliberately redirect our attention back to an anchor or back to something else entirely. And the repetitive nature of that can really support lifting mood. And that is what the evidence suggests to us. And it's very effective. So mindfulness, MBCT, is equally as effective as taking drugs for preventing low mood and depression. So it's a very, very powerful therapy, a very powerful intervention.
Wow, that's fantastic. Well, great. So I mentioned that you've got a website. Hopefully you can see my screen. So it's lisawren.co.uk, and that's where people can find the mindfulness practices, I think. And they can also connect with you on LinkedIn. But thank you so much, Lisa. It's been fantastic. Hopefully people will find your website and sort of dig in a little bit deeper. And don't forget that Kindle offer at the time of recording. Please tune into our next session on Tuesday, the 27th of August at 2 p.m. UK time. Our book of the month will be The Financial Times Guide to Mentoring by Gautian and Andy Lapata. Their webinar is on meaningful mentoring, creating valuable mentoring relationships as a mentor or mentee. So thank you, everyone, and hopefully you found that useful, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Eloise. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.